Hey guys, welcome back to, I guess, conversation number 2 here of the weekend services. Ryan and I are just sitting down to chat about some thoughts and different things our families have talked about kind of over the last couple weeks, especially when thinking about the sermons from the weekend. And lots of good thoughts coming again from this weekend. I've seen some of your comments and things coming in, and so that influenced us a little bit. But a couple of things I just wanted to talk about. And by the way, you probably gauged from last week, we don't have all of the answers. That's
For sure.
it's definitely not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We would fail you miserably on that. But I think it is helpful just to process some of these things like we would normally do over a cup of coffee or just with our friends. But this is what we have for now. And so I think it's been kind of fun doing that. So that being said, I want to jump into a couple of questions here, and you'll probably see us here throughout the week, splitting this into a couple parts where we'll cover a lot of different questions. But Ryan, the first thing I thought of during the week here, kind of processing the message from this weekend, was thinking about the idea of our circumstances. And part of this was like an old church thing that came up for me where it was like, I would just say like, my head hurts, and they're like, well, at least you're not starving, or like,
Right.
at least you have a roof over your head, and the basically classically known as minimization of your problems.
Yep.
And so when I thought about this, I was trying to think about this with Melinda the other day. We were talking about how do we legitimize our circumstances that are certainly tough. They are not the same as everyone's, but they are tough for us, whether it's a job loss, a sports season we're not getting to do, a graduation, a wedding, whatever it is.
Right.
How do we legitimize that while not letting it overtake me, right? Because it's wrong to minimize it and
Yep.
pretend like it doesn't matter. That is not helpful. But it also, we can't swing the other way and just let it completely like send me into shutdown mode. So thinking about striking that balance, what thoughts would you have on that?
I love the question, man. As I think it's a pet peeve because I didn't grow up in the church, and so I walked into the church and saw some of that minimization happen. Right, like you have something wrong, kind of suck it up.
Yeah.
At least you're not starving or dying or being beaten for your faith. So it can't be
Right.
that bad. And there's a part of it that's tough because you're like, that's true. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. And I'm actually having a hard time. It's still difficult for me. Like, right, it's a real thing. So I think what I love is I think we see this pattern play out in the Psalms, which we talked about last week a little bit. In the Psalms, you have people who are tough people. David is a warrior. He's a king. He's seen battle. He's bore weight in leadership, right? Like he's not a wimp. And he's actually suffering. He's like in real pain. So he doesn't pretend like he's not in pain. He actually admits it, owns it, is honest about it, and then comes out the other side with like trust and courage and faith in God. And that pattern of like bringing God into the honest reality of where I am, coming out the other side in faith, is the pattern that you see in the Psalms like over and over and over again. And it's so different, I think, from our natural way to be, because like I think we tend to go from one or two extremes. You nailed it. Either I look at my circumstances and my pain, and I'm like, nothing affects me.
Right.
I am immune to all of it. There's always somebody who has it worse, and that's going to be true no matter
Yeah.
what. But in the meantime, I got underneath the surface anger and grief, and sometimes bitterness and questions and doubts and all the fear, right? All the stuff that's actually there. If I don't acknowledge any of that, it's going to come out somewhere. The other side of it is I let it be so defining in my life that it cripples me. I'm making mountains out of molehills. It really isn't that big of a deal. It's hard, right? Some things are a big deal, but some things aren't, right? So
Right.
trying to put perspective on that stuff, I think is huge and helpful, and not letting myself get swept away by any circumstance, truly, right? And so I think finding our way through it, being honest, bringing God into the equation, and then landing in a place where there's faith at the end of the day. Watching that arc with the Psalms is like so helpful.
Yeah.
Over and over and over. You kind of go into the valley, and then you come out the other side. A lot of us, we're Americans, we just want to skip the valley. I want to just
Right.
go right to faith.
Yeah, can you just build me a bridge over that maybe?
Right.
Like,
Like despair and lament and grief and
Yeah.
anguish. Like, let's skip all that and just jump right here. And I don't think we're made that way. I
Yeah.
don't think it works. There's a great book that really helped me a lot a couple of years ago called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
I love that book.
Emotionally Healthy
Yep.
Spirituality, and it like nails all this stuff and a bunch of other things that we tend to kind of suffer from, like religiously transmitted diseases that we pick up and not process emotion properly.
Yeah. I love that. I don't know about you guys. I think really what happened to me sometimes with that is I would start to kind of internalize that and think, well, maybe it isn't a big deal. And I start to carry this like guilt of like, is there something wrong with me? Is my faith broken?
Right.
And I love the idea of just those two simple things, like one, inviting God into the conversation. It's something that I'll be the first to raise my hand and say I often forget to do.
Yep.
Right? That alone can make a huge difference. And then really putting that perspective on it. I love thinking about it that way, is like how big of a deal is this, right? Am I allowed to feel these feelings? Certainly. But should it influence every decision for the rest of my life? Probably not, right? There's probably very few that
Yeah.
should. But I love just even those two simple things that can help us kind of through that decision-making process.
It's great.
But yeah, guys, that Emotionally Healthy Spiritually book is great. I ended up reading that, I think, in my master's work. And I think this all kind of goes back to, on a practical level, the healthy processing of emotions.
Yep.
And that's a hard thing to do because we all come from such different backgrounds. So that's question number one. Glad we could really chat about that. Really excited to get to the rest of these this week as well.